Welcome everybody to today's webinar, Citizen Science in a Global Perspective. Thank you very much for joining us from wherever you are in Europe, in Australia, in the Americas and Africa. As I had a look through the participant list this morning, there were email addresses from across the globe really, and we very much appreciate that you got up early or stayed up late for this event, or that you may have lunch at your desk as our friends in the United Kingdom. My name is Simone Roedder. I am a sociologist at the University of Hamburg in Germany with a long-term research interest in science communication and public participation. I'm joining this online meeting from Hamburg, and I will chair and facilitate the discussion with the support of Claudia Göbel and Lisa Pettibon, who are the masters of this webinar technique. And it's really through their expertise at the Museum für Naturkunde in Berlin that we are able to run this event today. So thank you very much, Claudia and Lisa. The session was originally planned as a contribution. Sorry? Can you hear me?
I just wanted to say thank you for having us, and I'm happy to be here. This is Lisa.
Hi, Lisa. Thanks. So I meant to add that the session was originally planned as a contribution to the PCST conference in Istanbul, but almost all of us had to withdraw from this meeting for various reasons. So we're very pleased to have this webinar today, and we feel this is a good format, open to all and free of charge, to make the session inclusive and to open a global perspective on citizen science. So what's our concern today? What is citizen science? The term citizen science has become rather popular in recent years as an umbrella term for a variety of forms of public participation in research. This participation ranges from data gathering to more collaborative and community-led forms. And there are certainly distinct national and cultural traditions which shape how and in what fields non-scientists get involved with scientific projects. So citizen science has a history, a long history, under labels such as amateur science or hobbyism. Passionate citizens have been watching birds and butterflies. This is really like the cliche picture of citizen science, but this has been taking place really since the beginning of the 20th century. And they've also shared their data with the scientific community for a while. But both technical developments, namely the availability of digital media, and also political initiatives for more public participation in science, have fueled this recent trend to label many activities as citizen science that has caused us to propose this session. Because we as science and technology studies scholars and science communication scholars feel that this trend raises important questions, and these include asking who actually brings what to citizen science projects, what relationships develop between scientists, communities, and policymakers, where is the line between the empowerment of citizens as critical participants in research processes and the mere exploitation of their manpower or computer power. And for those of us who are interested in science communication, a further relevant question is whether citizen science practices with their use of digital technologies eventually challenge communication models such as the deficit model, or do they at the end still support deficit thinking and support a deficit model which basically states that more scientific literacy among members of the public, among citizens, leads to more understanding of science in the dual sense of comprehension and acceptance. So in order to tackle some of these questions, this webinar combines introductory statements with a discussion among participants. And our speakers and discussions include from the United States, Geoffrey Stills and Bruce Lundstein, from Israel, Yaela Golombek and Ayelet Baram Sabari, from Germany, Claudia Göbel and Lisa Pettibon, and Emma Whitecomb from the United Kingdom. And we had a great number of registered participants, and I see that we have a great number of participants online. But we had a lot of requests also from people who cannot make the session today. And that's why we decided that we will record the session. That's why you see this red button at the top right corner. So we will record the audio, the video, and the chat function and share it with our community afterwards. And we really hope that this is okay for everybody. So I will quickly run you through today's schedule. You also see it on the title slide. So we will have short input talks by Geoff, by Bruce, by Yala, and by Claudia. And we will, after the talks, or during the talks, you will have the chance to write. You see a chat box below the screen where you will see the slides, and you can raise your questions and concerns in the box. This chat will be monitored by Lisa, and she will collect questions and issues and ask them after the talk. You will get the chance to raise your hands and speak in the second part of the session, but merely for technical reasons, because it would take too much time to enable everyone's microphone. We will not have this in between the talks. But yeah, after this introductory statements, we will open the floor for a general discussion, and I will explain in more details then how to raise your hands and enable your microphones. But in the meanwhile, we are very pleased to welcome our first speaker, and that's Geoff Haynes, still joining us from the United States. So Geoff is a writer and producer and director of science documentaries and films, including Carl Sagan's seminal Cosmos series. I hope that you all had the chance to watch the trailer from his new film project, The Crowd and the Cloud, while you were waiting for the session to begin. If not, you will find the link to the trailer on the title slide, as you've seen, and we will show this title slide throughout the seminar and at the end of the session again. So please, Geoff, if you haven't done so, enable your microphone, and we're very happy to hear from you in a short keynote about your film project.
Thanks, Simone. Thanks, everybody. Sorry not to have got together with you in Istanbul, but given the nature of the communications revolution, it seems extremely appropriate that we can all be in one room virtually and span the globe this way. So if I say anything of interest or something of irritation, you have my email address at the bottom of the screen, so please be in touch afterwards. You are indeed encouraged to look at the various links that do a better job than I possibly could do in talking, that describe the project that we're engaged in. It is a television project called The Crowd and the Cloud. It had a fancy subtitle because we sent in a proposal to the National Science Foundation, which supported this effort, Citizen Science, Big Data, and the Democratization of Research. One of our advisors is Bruce Lowenstein, so very glad to be part of the same presentation that he is part of. And the democratization of research is something that Bruce has been talking about for many, many years, along with other folks that have been interested in citizen science. This is what we're trying to do with the series, to increase the visibility and credibility of and participation in projects using citizen science. And so in some sense, we're using television as a big billboard to make more and more people in the general public aware of what you specialists and enthusiasts for citizen science know full well. So we're definitely public facing. We are looking to go out to the general audiences in the United States and hopefully internationally with the programs. As Simone said, I've worked on Carl Sagan's Cosmos series, and it changed my life because I was a historian by background coming from the UK. I guess I was a part of the Brexit when I came and lived in the States long, long ago, but anyway, we also worked with Al Gore on a TV project that was going to be all about environmental issues until he was tapped to be vice president. But these kinds of projects showed me that television programs can share substantive ideas with millions and millions of people in a way that traditional books may no longer be able to do in quite the same way. Obviously, books remain important, but television and increasingly social media is a way of sharing ideas with millions of people. So this is the canonical definition of citizen science, which Ann Bowser and Leah Shanley put together. But as Simone said at the beginning, there are many, many other words that also relate to what we are generally calling citizen science. And hopefully, although this is a late-breaking PowerPoint, you can see some of the different ways in which citizen science has been defined by people. In some ways, you could summarize it in a, I guess this is an America-centric way of science for, by, and with the people. It's getting folks who have traditionally not necessarily been involved in gathering and sharing data to share data with more and more people. And that is occasioned by the revolution in communications technology, which has more mobile phones on Earth than people on the planet. Increasingly, smartphones enable folks to collect data about the environment and share that in real time. And that is the feature of our program. We look at some of the traditional citizen science projects, like the Christmas bird count and other kinds of birds and butterflies, but we also look at community activists who are using counting trucks, not counting birds, as a way to change diesel pollution in their area. So we have 4 one-hour programs under development. The first one has just been delivered to PBS. We'll be on the air in the States in March and April 2017. Our website debuted in April. It's crowdandcloud.org, and we're using social media to try and raise the visibility of our work and participation in our work. We're hoping to film in Barcelona, for example, and look at the very exemplary work that Barcelona has done in terms of anti-Zika activities, or actually anti-mosquito-borne diseases, but now focusing on Zika. And we were very interested in the ECSA conference in Barcelona, which talked about how the fact that the city of Barcelona has an Office of Citizen Science and some 28 city-related citizen science projects. As far as we know, that's the only city-related citizen science office around the world. We're looking to do collaborations and partnerships with NGOs and government agencies across the US, and are very interested in any input from those of you on this webinar for projects that we could feature in our social media between now and next summer. And we're basically approaching this as an open source activity. All of our videos will be on YouTube. They'll be easily able to be embedded and shared. And we basically just want to contribute to advancing the field of citizen science, which is truly a revolution in the way in which science is done. And it's wonderful to see it in this global context. So that's all I have to say just to start things off. Over to Bruce to elaborate on that from the more academic point of view, but I do want to say how much fun it has been to be exposed to citizen science projects, and we just want to pass the word on to as many people as we can by media, social media, and broadcast media around the world. So back to you, Simone, to continue the webinar.
Yeah, thank you very much for starting us off with this, this your view and your initiative. And as you said, we'll hand over to Bruce, who's been involved with the project, but who's obviously been involved with the entire topic for long. So Bruce is joining us from Cornell University in Ithaca, where he is a professor of science communication, and he's asking today how the PCST community might think about citizen science. So Bruce, may I ask you to enable both your microphone and your webcam and share your screen? And I see everybody else has already disabled their microphones, so that's perfect. The floor is yours.
Good. Thank you very much, Simone, and thank you, Claudia and Lisa as well for setting up this webinar and allowing us to come together, given that we were not able to make it in Istanbul, and give us this chance for people from all over the world to participate. I'm going to switch and I hope show you my slides in a moment here. Okay, you should be seeing my slides at this point. And what I want to do is to give us an overview of the the overall field of citizen science. I think Jeff has given us this great introduction by pointing out that it is both a way of collecting data, but also a way of presenting data. And the way he talks about Crowd in the Cloud as being something which is both a presentation about citizen science, but it is also, through its website and through its social media, a tool for collecting data as well. And part of what citizen science is bringing all of these things together. So as we try to think about citizen science overall, I think it's important for us to think about these words and think about the multiple ways, multiple meanings that citizen science has. So for many people, the term citizen science means scientists who are acting as citizens, scientists who are using their position as experts to participate in public life. That meaning of the word has been around for at least 30 or 40 years. There are books by Richard Feynman or Frank von Hippel, Thoughts of a Citizen Scientist, or Frank von Hippel, Citizen Scientist, other scientists who consider themselves citizen scientists. That's an important meaning of the word, of the phrase. It's not actually what we're talking about today. A second way that people talk about citizen scientists has been citizens who are engaged in science policy. So these are things like citizens forums and deliberative technology assessments, consensus conferences, various kinds of techniques that have been developed often under the label of public engagement in science to provide a way for citizens to participate in making their concerns known as policy gets developed, whether it's about new technologies or genetically modified organisms or neuroscience. There are a range of different kinds of activities like this that have happened. Now, although this is not precisely what we're going to be talking about today, much of citizen science that we will be talking about makes an attempt to engage with the policy world. And so we may want to, especially in the discussion, come back to this idea of citizens engaged in science policy. But the kind of citizen science that I think we're talking about mostly today are these situations where citizens are out gathering and often analyzing the data that is needed to produce reliable knowledge about the natural world. So we're talking about the production of scientific knowledge. And there are many, many examples. I don't know how well this is showing up on screens, but everything from some of the CIT projects that have been developed here at Cornell in the United States, the bird watching projects like Feeder Watch. There are storm projects, rain projects in the United States. There are online projects like Folding at Home or SETI at Home that use people's computing power. There are community-based projects. There's one of these slides is about climate change information. There's a whole collection of projects called the Zooniverse, the best known of which is called Galaxy Zoo, that are all computer-based projects, so on. So this range of things. We often think of this as a new field because it has grown so much in the last 5 or 10 or 20 years. But citizen science goes back at least a couple hundred years. An early example is from the United States, is in the middle of the 19th century. There was a naval officer, Lieutenant Matthew Maury, who worked with ship captains to collect data about the winds and the currents and the wind strengths, and created charts showing on a particular day in a particular place in the world what you could expect in terms of wind. These were collected. They're the basis of charts that are still used today. Maury was one of the first physical oceanographers, published one of the first textbooks of physical geography of the sea. this kind of weather-related data was one of the things that that came up fairly early. There were, especially in a place like the United States, because of its geographic spread, we had weather collectors who were sending information in from late in the 19th century, and actually some of them still collect. There are still some weather stations today that are collecting data on series that have been going on for 100 years or so. Mostly today, though, as I said, we're talking about these sort of newer projects. There are now so many of them that they collected. There are collections of projects. So I mentioned the Zooniverse. There's a database called SciStarter, started by a very prominent citizen science proponent in the United States named Darlene Cavalier. Science museums like the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences have lists of projects that they can participate. There are groups like the Public Lab of Science, which not only collaboratively produce technologies, but then turn those technologies over to other citizen science projects to be used. If you look at the Crowd in the Cloud, you will find some examples of all of these things on the trailers that are and the discussions that are on their website. Citizen science has grown so much that in the last 2 years, there are now at least 3 major citizen science associations. The Citizen Science Association, which in typical American imperialist version is primarily North American, though it calls itself the Citizen Science Association. There is also a European Citizen Science Association. There is an Australian Citizen Science Association, which I think is also covers, draws people from around the Southern Hemisphere. So this is clear, this dramatic growth, even in the last 2 years. I think it's important for us to see how quickly this is growing. It's showing up. There are blogs and discussions and so forth. Some of the biggest blogs are things like the Public Library of Science, which is different than the Public Laboratory of Science, but PLOS has a citizen science blog. There are the whole open science movement, focusing on trying to break science out of the traditional elites, and so forth. Importantly, for a group like those of us connected to the PCST world, which brings together researchers and scientists and public information officers and people like me who study public communication and participants, is that there is a growing scholarly literature about citizen science. So there's getting to be many different publications that are looking both at specific projects, but also looking at different ways of thinking about citizen science, different typologies. This has grown to the point that the Citizen Science Association has started a new journal called Citizen Science Theory and Practice. There are special issues of journals, the journal JCOM, which Emma Whitecamp, who will be speaking later, is the editor of. She and I did what we thought would be one special issue on citizen science. We had so many submissions that it ended up being 2 special issues earlier this year. So it's a big field, and it's a growing field. It's a field we should be paying attention to. Now the question is, what should we call this field? As Jeff said in his slide, it's got many, many different names. We can call it citizen science, we can call it volunteer monitoring, crowdsourced science, public participation in scientific research, science hacking, do-it-yourself biology or do-it-yourself science, DIY science. I actually don't think it's very important that we pick among these. What I do think is important is that we pay attention to these different labels and understand what their implications are and how, why people are choosing these different names and what kinds of different politics may be involved. Something like volunteer monitoring highlights the volunteer aspect, whereas if you call it science hacking, that has a more subversive kind of feel to it. And sometimes there is explicitly a subversive goal among some citizen scientists. And I think we need to pay attention to the meaning of those labels. As people as we start having all of this studying of citizen science, some of the questions that come up most regularly are questions about the validity of the data. There's people looking at how good citizen science data is. In general, the answer is it's good. I won't go into details, but it seems as though it produces reliable knowledge. A lot of questions about volunteer motivation, what makes people want to participate in citizen science, what are some of their goals. A lot of people from the education community particularly concerned about what do citizen scientists learn, what kind of science literacy do they achieve, what kind of understanding of science do they take away, are there specific aspects of science that they learn, specific aspects of knowledge about the natural world. And then questions about best practices. How should one, if one is organizing a new citizen science project, how should you do it? What's the best way to organize it? These are all important questions. These tend to be the kinds of questions that people from the science world, as opposed to the social science or science education world, some of the science education world will have this. But these tend to be the kinds of questions that people within the citizen science community are most concerned with. There's a different set of questions that people from the science studies or STS world might bring. These are, we might call them meta questions. These are the questions that ask, what is it that citizen science tells us about the nature of science itself? Who holds expertise? Is expertise held by the researchers, by the scientists who are involved in helping set up the projects? Is expertise held by the participants, the citizens themselves? Do different levels of expertise change the way you view your own participation or the way you draw people in? Questions about who owns the data. If you are a citizen scientist who's out observing the natural world, birds or fish or weather, who owns your data? If you send it into the citizen science project, do you retain the right to that data? This has led to some disputes over things like authorship, who gets to be an author on an article based on citizen science data. What does it mean to recruit all of these people? Are they laborers? Are they technicians? There's a long tradition in the history and sociology of science of studying the hidden labor that is behind the names that we think of, all the invisible technicians. How is citizen science changing that? How do projects that are based not in the elite science world, how do they acquire authority? Why would anybody listen to the results that come from a citizen science project? What are the techniques and methods that citizen scientists and the organizers of citizen science projects use? How do they come to create, to acquire social authority that allows them to address, let's say, environmental problems in their community? Ultimately, I think the questions about citizen science are about citizenship. I've been very careful to keep using the word citizen science, and yet the very notion of citizenship is an interesting one. If you are a citizen scientist, what are you a citizen of? Is it your country? Is it the world of science? We have a number of examples around the world where people who are not citizens of their countries participate in citizen science. We have some examples in the United States where people who are what we call undocumented residents or illegal immigrants, there are various labels that have their own political meanings here, but people who don't want to be known because they are afraid of being deported, and yet they are participating in citizen science. What does that mean? What's the relationship with authority? For those of us, particularly in the science communication world, obviously, I think we're interested in knowing what kind of public understanding is created, and what's the relationship of public participation with public engagement. In order to understand these things, I think there's a huge amount of literature that people in our community can be looking at, literature that exists, so that even though the citizen science world itself is new and it has its own literature, I think there are other literatures that in other fields we should be thinking about the nature of expertise, about the nature of scientific work, about the ownership and control of data. I think increasingly there's work in the education world, community action world, field of geography. If I were to go back to graduate school now, I think I'd try to go to geography because there's so much there that we could be using. All of these things, I think, are things that we need to pay attention to if we want to understand the breadth of citizen science. There are these big categories, the nature of knowledge production. What does it mean? What are the communities that produce knowledge? What are the role of new technologies? Again, Jeff pointed to a lot of the new mobile technologies. Some of those are clearly critical, and yet some citizen science is very local, depends on very little technology. There are these ethical questions about the ownership of data and about who controls a project and so forth. And these are all things that I think we need to think about as we move forward in citizen science. Jeff's program of Crowd in the Cloud is one way of looking at this. As he said, it will be broadcast in 2017. There's already lots of web and social media presence that you can see by going to crowdinthecloud.org. So I'm going to just stop there and see if I can figure out how to stop sharing these screens. And I'm going to turn it over to Yaela Gollenbeck, who's actually sitting with me here in Ithaca, and let her introduce her talk. Simone, do you want to take it back for a minute first, or should we go straight to
I just checked that there's been some chatting going on, but it's not been directly related to your talk as I would require a direct question and answer. So I would actually agree that we should move on to Yaela for some concrete project, citizen science project.
Hi everyone. Yes, I'm Yaela. I'm leading the citizen science project Sensing the Air together with Professor Roedder, who's also sitting here with us today. And I will describe a little bit of the more specific things that we've been doing in the project and studying the project, and a little bit of the connection to science communication. So we're going to try and get our slides on.
We can see your slides, fine.
You can see the slides, but we can't get it to move. Hold on a second.
Okay. So as Bruce and Jeff have already said, citizen science describes the involvement of volunteers in scientific research projects. It is growing worldwide with hundreds of projects that can be found in North America and in Europe. But with that said, citizen science hasn't yet gotten everywhere. For Israel, for example, the number of citizen science projects that are active can be counted in 2 hands. So we are leading a citizen science in the city of Haifa in Israel, which is called Sensing the Air. It is part of a larger project called CitySense. This European-funded, European funded project, which wants to empower people through their involvement in environmental issues. And the specific issue that was chosen was air quality monitoring. Air quality monitoring in Haifa is actually a big issue. Haifa is a very controversial city because of the big industrial area in Haifa Bay. Over the past 20 years, and more than that, people have been very concerned about air quality in Haifa. In the picture below, you can see a little girl demonstrating with a sign saying, "Help, I'm suffocating." That is me 25 years ago. So although the Ministry of Environmental Protection has invested many resources in reducing the emissions of air pollution, and they actually say that emissions have been reduced in over 70% in this period, but people are still worried and still concerned. Lately, air quality has been a major topic in the media, with headlines stating there are 20% more cancer cases in Haifa because of air pollution. And the Environmental Protection Agency is going to declare Haifa air pollution striking zone. These headlines create chaos, and people are very, very worried, and they don't know what to think and what to do about the air quality. And although the air quality experts will say Haifa is no different than other cities in the country, people are very worried. This gives us very good grounds for starting a citizen science project and a science communication project. And we try and connect the two. We want to encourage people to have an open conversation about air quality. And through the collection and the analyzing good quality and reliable and local data about air quality, we hope people will start understanding and talking about this topic more openly. So as I said, our project, Sense in the Air, is a collaboration between scientists at the Technion and the residents of the neighborhood of Sha'anan in Haifa as part of the European project City Sense. Throughout the project, we distributed air sensors like the one that you can see in the picture below in different places throughout the neighborhood, in public places, in people's houses, in schools, and all the data that is measured by these sensors is collected and provided in a platform that we built, which I will describe today, how we built this platform and how the data is presented in the platform. What is very important for us in this project is that the sensors are located in places where people spend most of their time. So it really gives them data that is relevant to their day-to-day life. So the main goal of this research is to examine citizen science potential to improve public understanding and public engagement with science. So we're trying to find the relationship between the two fields, science communication and citizen science. In order to achieve this goal, we set two starting goals, which are the things that I will present today during this presentation. The first one is to explore citizens' perception towards air quality in Haifa and to see what kinds of information, what things they are interested in obtaining. Our second goal was to design a citizen science platform for data collection and data presentation. We did this using a user-centered design approach, which I will explain shortly. Our research population includes participants from the general public, including people or residents that have sensors in their homes, and other participants that are active in the project website. Data collection, we use a mixed method approach, including semi-structured interviews with residents hosting sensors in their homes, focus groups, a perception questionnaire, and comments left on the project website. Starting our research, we wanted to assess participants' perceptions towards air quality in Haifa. And as you can see in the figure on the left, people are quite concerned about air quality. Almost 70% of the people think that air quality is quite or very poor. We asked people to say what information they are interested in, what questions they want to know about the air quality in Haifa. Some of the questions that people said, or some of the comments, are about existing monitoring systems, about personal exposure, and requests for additional information. These comments can be divided into 3 categories: factual information, bottom line and health implications, and trust, or rather distrust comments. During building our data presentation platform, we use a user-centered design, which is based on active involvement of users to improve understanding of platform requirements and conduct iterations of design and evaluation. In the figure below, you can see the circular nature of the user-centered design, which starts with assessing the needs of the community through building a prototype and testing usability, all with a very strong emphasis on evaluation in each step of the design. I will now describe how we built the platform using the system over a time of about 6 months. While assessing the needs of the community, we first presented to interviews 3 levels of data presentation. The first was the overall map of the neighborhood with points in different colors that assemble air quality measurement. With the different colors are a 1 to 5 qualitative scale of the air quality. Where green is very good air quality and red very bad air quality. Next, we showed distribution graphs of different pollutants, and following by a general raw data table with all the measurements. We asked people to tell us, first of all, what they understand from each presented figure, and second, in which way they want to see the data presented. The results were very conclusive. People understood and wanted to see the general map. They did not understand and did not want to see the raw data. And the distribution graphs were about 50-50. Some people understood it and some people were not interested. Additional types of feedback we received during the process of the interviews in a few rounds of iterations were, for example, what pollutants are being measured? How does the data correspond with other standards in the country or in the world? How do we build a qualitative scale that is presented? People wanted more explanation about each of the pollutants that is being measured, and so forth. These comments can also be divided to a few categories: factual information, putting things into context, clarification, and bottom line and health implications. So we took all these comments and all this information and we went back to design. And we added all these features according to the comments. So for example, we added the standards according to Israeli law on the qualitative scale. We added pictures and explanations about each of the pollutants. We added health recommendations. And finally, it seemed that our project was ready. As one of the participants, one of the focus groups said after we implemented all these changes, the platform is clear and provides the information necessary to understand the topic. It was great to see the amount of data received when pressing on the center icon, especially the health recommendation. The data is clear and available to all, and that is a big advantage. So if we'd like to summarize the things that the users of sensing the air are interested in seeing, is understanding basic facts on different air pollutants, putting things into context and understanding how air quality in the city is relevant to other places in the world or to the standards. Bottom line, is the city really polluted? And practical implications of the data presented. But we are not finished. This is actually just the beginning. Now that we have a platform that meets the needs of the community, we want to further examine the usability of the platform. We want to examine what people do with the platform, what data is interesting for them. We want to see if they use the data to answer real scientific research questions. And most importantly, we want to ask the question, can citizen science improve public understanding and public engagement with science?
Thank you very much, Yaela, for presenting your case study. So I think we've got a very nice overview from Ruth in terms of introducing types of citizen science projects, but also introduce certain ways of thinking about citizen science projects from various academic points of view. And then we've heard from the user-centered approach and citizen science projects in Israel. And we'll now move on to a perspective that looks at how citizen science has become increasingly professionalized and institutionalized in recent years. So Claudia's title is Practitioners, Organizations as Agents of Professionalization in Citizen Science. And we're looking forward to your talk, Claudia. Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much. I would like to take a closer look at those associations and networks that Bruce has mentioned very briefly and see what role they do play for the emergent field of citizen science. And my basic assumption would be citizen science has this very long history, and I would say as long as we have had citizen science practitioners, that means for me those people that implement the projects, be them project managers or volunteers or people working in different institutions, they have organized themselves, either in informal networks or in formal associations, but this is a very typical structure we find. But I would also argue that so far, or in the past, this has mostly happened in the different research communities. And what we are seeing now, globally, is the formation of generalist or cross-disciplinary associations and networks that promote citizen science as such. They vary in geography. We find, for example, national networks, as you can see here on the slide. I've put some examples, like the Citizen Science Network in China or the Australian Citizen Science Association. And then you even have bigger than national scales, regional at the EU level with the European Citizen Science Association or the Citizen Science Association, which is based in the US but open internationally. Those associations, some of them, they form around research groups, like is the case with the Citizen Science Network in China or the New Zealand Citizen Science Network. Others emerge around platforms like the ones that Lisa has also been pointing out in the chat, Bürgerschaften Wissen, the German one, Citizens Create Knowledge, or the Austrian one, Austria Researches. And for others, they emerge around, so to say, intermediary organizations, like it is the case in Spain or in Switzerland, for example. And for us to get a little bit an idea of what such citizen science practitioner organizations are and what they do, I'd like to take the example of the European Citizen Science Association, ECSA. And just, give a little overview. So if we look at the composition, we find that ECSA is a network of different kind of research institutes, universities, museums, but also NGOs, SMEs, and policy institutions. Right now, we are having 172 members from 27 countries, and I say we because for the last 2 years I coordinated the headquarters of this association. Now I moved over to a project. Membership is for institutions and for individuals, and you can see there is a little diagram on the sectors. So 3/4 of the members come from the science sectors, and then we have a little bit civil society and business, and then a long tail of science communication, government, and also educational institutions. If we look at the level of ideas and values in the strategy of ECSA, you find 3 big points. One is promoting sustainability through citizen science. So here there is a focus on the environment and how we can live better on this planet. And then at the center there is this building a think tank for citizen science. It's called at ECSA. So here is getting practitioners together for the exchange of knowledge, of skills, and also providing information and expertise to members outside of this community. And then lastly, there is a method development. So here you find that also research is conducted on citizen science and synthesis work done. At the structural level, I don't want to go into detail here, but you can see that usually at those associations you find a general assembly that collects, like all the members come together here to make the basic discussion decisions of the association, and then there are some boards in the middle and a small secretariat usually supporting this association. What I'd like to point out, I don't know if you can see my thingy on the screen where I'm pointing at, you can see the working group, and this is at least at ECSA where the major work of the association happens, all the programmatic work that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. There's also all kind of social relations going on, but we're not going into detail here. So what we did is we conducted a review of different citizen science associations, those 4 that I mentioned before, with some colleagues that are working at those associations, but also researchers in science communication. And what we find is on this level of values, strategies, all those associations and the Chinese network, they have similar strategies, similar objectives, and similar missions. So to bring practitioners together to promote citizen science in the research community and beyond. The structures are also kind of similar, however we find differences as to who is incorporated. So the Chinese Citizen Science Network is not yet incorporated, it's very much in a state of infancy of forming a practitioner organization, and the Australian Citizen Science Association is now on the way to being incorporated. The same is true for the composition, that obviously varies with the level of or the design of the membership structure. For example, ECSA has a paid membership structure, so we're at about 200 members. CSA has a non-paid membership structure, and they're about 3,000–4,000 members. And AXA in Australia, they don't have a formal membership structure yet. So you can see that there is a little, I would say that you can see different phases of development and formalization of those kind of associations. And we have identified a common areas of work that all of these associations share. And I'd like to start in the middle to point out that one of the central fields of activity is infrastructure and communication services. And here, obviously, we find basic services such as the websites or the annual conferences that all of these associations are doing. But then it's quite interesting that we find this big field of scholarly communication with the open access journal Citizen Science Theory and Practice that Bruce has also mentioned. It has been driven very much by people from the Citizen Science Association in the US with researchers from the other associations also on the editorial board. So this is a community effort in scholarly communication. And another very important area there is research infrastructure. So there are various working groups at those associations and also a cross-cutting one on citizen science data and metadata standardization and the exchange of developments that are happening in the different regions of the globe there. Then at the center, we find another very important area that is good practice collections and standards development. All of the associations are active here. Some examples include the Australian BioBlitz guidelines on this very specific format of citizen science activity. And at ECSA, the working group on best practice has come up with the 10 principles of citizen science that represent somehow a set of community guidelines of how to do good citizen science projects. And beyond that, of course, there's other work in methods and metrics development. Then a third area would be policy-related work of those associations. So they develop policy briefs, policy papers, work with environmental agencies, or also from the US, this example, there's the Federal Community of Practice on crowdsourcing and citizen science, and there has been a tools repository made available. So there are a lot of cooperations going on as well. And one overarching area, you can see this on the top, for all the associations is actually environmental monitoring, because it's a core area of their membership. Traditionally, there's a lot of citizen science activities going on in environmental monitoring. So here you find professional development, data sharing, and many other activities that we've also listed in the columns below. And then there's this tiny other area on the bottom of the screen, which is cooperation between these organizations, which is also explicitly pushed in the recent years. And so far, we find most cooperation activities concentrated in the first column regarding the journal, to do joint conferences, international conferences, and also to exchange resources and work together for digital infrastructures and online resources. From those common areas of work and the reviews we conducted, we arrived at, so to say, 3 core functions of citizen science organizations. And this is my main point that I would like to throw in the discussion. So actually, what they do is to build expertise And here's the thesis that those networks that we see forming, those generalized citizen science association, they're actually peer networks which are knowledge-based. And the knowledge that they build around is practitioner knowledge of how to implement citizen science projects, but also on those different questions of data, of communication, that Bruce has addressed some of them. Then another core function is internally facing, to establish citizen science communities and facilitate access to expertise and resources of other people in the community between those peers. And a third area would be outwards facing, so by providing advocacy, representing the community interests with other stakeholders. And I think if we take those three functions together, we can see how those associations and networks are helping to professionalize the field of citizen science by providing these resources. And there are some challenges that several policy papers in the different geographies are turning up, what we need to do to make citizen science effective and inclusive for people. And you can see that the citizen science associations are starting to work on those challenges and are strategically well positioned to address them. Obviously, they also have challenges in doing so. So funding for the programmatic activities and the association work is definitely one big one, because they are located at this intersection between research and society. So it's quite an interesting field to see what is going to happen here in the next years. Then inclusiveness, and here I firstly mean in the structures of these associations. So how can they continue their trajectories of actually being a loudspeaker and a catalyst for the communities? What structures do they need to put in place? And also plurality in the approaches that they are promoting. So that gets us back to the question, what is actually citizen science? What is promoted as citizen science, and how far do we draw the lines? With that, thank you very much for your attention, and if you have any other questions, then please get in touch.
Thank you so much, Claudia, for elaborating on this cross-national trend of a professionalization of the field by way of associations and meetings and journals. So yeah, we've been back to the question of what is citizen science, and we've seen a couple of answers, I think, of what's developing around the globe. So thanks so much for all the speakers for their presentations. And if everybody could switch on their webcams again, we can start the open discussion. So that's an option for the speakers only, actually. But we have now the option of raising your hands if you want to join the discussion. You can always join by chatting, but you see this person button on the top of the screen right from the webcam button. And if you click this button, you will raise your hand, and it should show up in your participant status that you've raised your hand. I guess, well, while you're very welcome to join in, but while you're getting ready and maybe think about your questions, I would really like to invite Emma Whitekamp, who you can see because she switched her webcam on now as well. So she's joining us from the UK, and I think most of you know her as the editor of the Journal of Science Communication, and you've just seen the special issues of the journal that just came out and that were co-edited by Emma and Bruce. So I want to ask her from her editing of the journal and reading all the proposals and full papers, but also from her listening to the discussions. Is there anything, Emma, that you want to add? Is there any major issues in both the practice and in the study of citizen science and emergent scholarship on the field that you want to comment on?
Thank you, Simone. I think probably my observation is perhaps around areas that all three presentations touched on, and were gaps actually in the material that we received in submissions to the special issue, and that's that question around the extent to which participating in citizen science projects is a form of public engagement. What do citizens take away from that beyond the project that they're involved in particular? And I think Yela's probably a bit early yet to really answer that question, but that seemed to be really at the heart of the project that you're working on is trying to understand, how these kinds of projects do or don't work as public engagement. And then related to that, I think the other observation I had, again, was around how do these sorts of projects actually enable or encourage participation in policy and decision making. So to what extent do our citizen participants take forward that participation in research and think about becoming activists and engaging in the policy process, either directly the science policy process or possibly it's more around, say, town planning or something else, depending on the area of science that they're working in. So I would make those as my two kind of observations from what I've heard, and ask the panel if they have any thoughts or comments.
Is there a specific project that you would have in mind with regard to citizens becoming engaged as activists in policy-making processes? That's maybe a question to Emma, but it would obviously be a question to all the speakers.
Yeah, I don't have a specific question, but I think in my own, it was one of the things that I observed we didn't get submissions on in our special issue.
Okay.
But also within my own practice, that's one of the areas I'm quite interested in, is to what extent do you actually create a more engaged and participatory group of citizens as a result of engagement. I'm not aware of research in that area, but I'd like the panel's thoughts on that, really.
Great. So I see that Bruce has raised his hand. What do you need to do to unmute? Yeah, I see. Thanks. Bruce, do you hear me?
Yep, there. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I think the point that Emma raised, which is about sort of the different kinds of projects and the different origins of them, I think is an important one. Some early people have paid attention to the difference, but what are sometimes called contributory projects, where the scientist designs it and says, I need a bunch of people to help me. That's very much the sort of laborer or technician model. The collaborative project, where the community works with the scientists to say, here's an issue and we need help. I think probably the City Sense project is like that. Or the co-produced, or the projects where it's really the community driving a need. And sometimes the scientists the formal scientific community is barely involved or is involved just as consultants. And these are often the environmental monitoring projects, especially when they involve an environmental justice issue, a community that has traditionally not had access to power and is using citizen science as a way of getting, giving themselves some level of authority by having information that they can then use in their arguments with communities. Some of the projects that Jeff has filmed for The Crowd and the Cloud are these kinds of very much community-driven projects. I want to highlight that some of our analysis is already starting to show some of that, although there's clearly a lot of variation that can go on.
Thanks very much for bringing this up, both Emma and Bruce. I actually think that this is a concern across the globe, that there is this tendency to kind of view this scientist-led contributory project, as you've said, and the citizen-led community-led citizen-led project as somewhat opponents, and that's very pronounced actually in Germany. Driven by an author who would actually speak of citizen science light versus citizen science proper, so very much applying this normative distinction between a sort of citizen science that's okay to start with maybe, but then there's a citizen science proper, which is the real thing. And we've talked about the long history and about how passionate people have been about gathering data. And I feel that this is a politicization of the debate that it's not very useful for anyone. So I would think that this is something that we as scholars might address to try to help to overcome this thinking of citizen science projects as either scientist-led and then somehow lighter, and then thinking of community-led and collaborative projects as the kind of real thing in citizen science, but maybe to speak of to rather think of them as mutually enriching or mutually complementing one another. Okay, so Joff has raised his hand, so I'll try to unmute his microphone.
Oh, thank you for doing that. Yeah, we've got a bunch of case studies, which is obviously what we're trying to do with the series. And there's a very interesting one in the third program, which deals with fracking, which is obviously a global concern. There was a regular person living in Wyoming who was concerned about air and other pollution right beside her. She reached out to the Bucket Brigade, which is a group of citizens who have developed a low-cost air pollution sensor and took data that was part of a 5-state study. But we have a very interesting interview with Denny Larson, who is one of the founders of the Bucket Brigade, who realized that the data would be taken more seriously if it was written up and published in a peer-reviewed article. So he reached out to a professional researcher, PhD, MD at the State University of New York in Albany, and the citizen science data was written up in a professional journal and published, and became cited as part of New York State's decision to banish or to not let fracking start in the state. And that's a very interesting example of where there's a true cooperation, collaboration between citizen science data founded in a personal concern about what's happening locally, but then becoming something that has national significance by working with professional researchers. So I just think that's a very interesting example. In the second program, we also have a community group in West Oakland that was concerned about diesel pollution, and they used sensors from Berkeley, Intel, but they also, instead of counting birds, and in traditional science, they counted trucks, as simple as sitting on the sidewalk with a clipboard and counting trucks and then trying to correlate that with health problems. And then they were able to take that to City Hall and to the local air quality management district and get changes in truck routes from there. So this is something where they said that having solid data as opposed to just anecdotes and complaints really changed their status vis-a-vis the local agencies. And one of our other advisors, who Bruce knows, Raj Pandya, says, if you're not at the table, you can be on the menu. And collecting data and solid information gets you to the table and gets you taken seriously. And that is, I think, something that any community, whether it's working with public lab tools, documenting spills into the Gowanus Canal here in New York City, or following up after the BP oil spill using kites and balloons, capturing data that is solid and objective changes your power balance vis-a-vis the local authorities.
Yeah.
That's it.
Thanks very much, Jeff, for bringing that up, because I think it speaks to a second tendency that I find that sometimes prevalent in the discussion, and that's again to kind of have citizen science as opposed to academic science, so to see the two again as opponents rather than to see them as mutually enriching and complementing one another. So I really like your example about citizens, a community-led project, but then working with your own scientists and getting their results published and noticed and acknowledged in legal documents. I guess I have lost track of the chat, and I'd like to invite Lisa, who's been monitoring the chat more closely, whether she wants to bring in some of the issues raised there.
Sure, I'm happy to. I've been writing the questions that I've seen in the chat into the discussion notes to the left, as well as kind of the general topics that have been discussed. The first question, which I found very interesting, is who initiates citizen science activities? Is it mainly scientists? Is it citizens? Is it the media? Other actors? I think you spoke to this already, Emma, a little bit. by saying it really depends, and there are lots of different types of projects. Bruce, you also kind of supported this statement by talking about the different kind of conceptual terms around citizen science. Is it a participatory project? Is it a contributory project or a collaborative project? And I think that's something that we've seen in Germany as well, is that the type of project, the way that the project looks and is practiced, is affected pretty dramatically by who is initiating the project and who is leading the project. So this is a very interesting topic. Another question that I saw raised in the chat that hasn't been discussed yet is, how can citizen science be used in school curricula? Is that something that someone in the panel can speak to?
The connection to school education?
Okay.
Yes, okay. So I've actually done some work in schools with this project. I work with 5 different schools in the neighborhood. I work mainly with the teachers. I met with them about once a month. So what I did in our project is meet with the teachers, sort of explain to them the general methods of monitoring that we use and the different concepts regarding air quality. And together we thought of research questions, and we actually defined different places to put air sensors in the different schools together with the students. I did it together with the teachers, and then the teachers together with the students decided where they wanted to locate air quality sensors in their schools. And we deployed the sensors, and then the students got all the data collected from the sensors and did their own research questions and research projects with the data. And some of the things that they did was examine different locations within the school where we put sensors, or different locations between the different schools. We put the sensors at the entrance to each school and in the yard of each school, and then the students could compare between the different schools. So that was actually a really, really nice project that we did in the schools. I know that other projects that are very large projects, such as eBird, have specific curriculums that they built in order to give teachers the materials to present in the class, and they have a very large variety of classes and curriculums that they built. So that is a very good resource for teachers to use in their classrooms, and other projects have similar.
Yeah, so just to add to that, and then actually Ayala, who's here, wants to jump in as well. Ayala just mentioned the things like eBird have these formal curriculums, but Emma has just pointed out in the chat box that it's often hard to work some citizen science into school curriculums because national curriculums tend to be so packed and so very specific, and citizen science doesn't always fit in very well. Part of what's happening in the United States is that some citizen science projects have worked with teachers to figure out how to build a curriculum that will meet, we don't have a national standard, but we don't. I won't go into American craziness in our education, but to try to fit into the prescribed curriculum. So Ayala Barham-Sabari, who's Ayala's co-author, is also here in the room with me visiting in Ithaca, as it happens this week, so she wanted to step in, so I'll get out of the way.
Thank you. And hello everyone. I just want to jump in about connection with formal curriculum. It's important to understand that doing authentic research is not necessarily the best learning environment for everything. So it's important, I think, to ask ourselves when we want to connect between citizen science and between formal education. For what purpose are we doing this, and what are we trying to achieve? What kind of learning are we trying to achieve? And I think if I needed to answer this question, I would say, well, the first really obvious thing is motivation. Because if people have ownership over their data, if people have feel that the question they're studying is relevant to them or to their families, they will be more motivated to learn about it. And motivation is really the basis for so much of learning. And the second thing that people can learn very well, I think, participating in such activities is about science inquiry. So how to do science, how to design experiments, like Ella just said, how to sample, how to collect data in a systematic way. And that's something that if you do locally can actually be used later for other things as well, if we want to be optimistic. So I'm not sure that learning specific content, if I needed to teach specific content, I don't think citizen science would be the way I would do it. But if I want to teach about scientific inquiry, if I want to teach people what science can do for them and why is it a good way to learn about the world and to make decisions, then that's a good activity, I think, to put into the science framework curriculum.
Thank you, Annette and Bruce and Yala. And please know that Emma has contributed her experience from the UK in the chat. And I had Geoff raising his hand for this question as well. Geoff, do you still want to say something, add something?
No, I think I've had my say, and I appreciate the time. I don't wish to take up any more of the discussion. So just thanks for inviting us to share. And just repeating what I said in the textbooks, if you have projects that you think others would be interested in knowing about, please share them via our social media platforms. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And I have Claudia, and then we're actually at the end of the session. Claudia?
I just wanted to react to the other questions of actually who participates in citizen science. And there is a lot of research underway right now to see that, and we have Mookie Heckley recently gave a presentation saying that the evidence that we have so far is that mostly we reach people that already have a PhD and that are very science literate already, and then they spend their free time also when they're retired on citizen science projects. So this is a huge part of the group that take part in citizen science project. And when it comes to inner city groups or other marginalized groups, we don't have much data, but also we need to do a lot more work to be more inclusive in those citizen science projects. But an interesting observation that is connected to that and links it a little bit back to what Lisa was saying before is that there is this typologies of citizen science projects, who initiates them, and then that is linked to who participates. And we are right now starting a new Horizon 2020 project that is called DITO's Doing It Together Science, and there we are doing citizen science activities all across Europe. And the test that we want to do there is that there are different levels of participation in citizen science projects. So one may be more passive and using your smartphone just to take some measurements during the night, and another one may be much more immersive, doing an intensive workshop over several weeks. And what we would really like to research on is how the types of participation are linked to those different kinds of projects, and if you can actually build something like an escalator of inspiring people to get deeper involved, or if we stay at different levels for different people in different scientific disciplines.
Thanks, Claudia. I want to add a final note because you said that one of the things you see with the Citizens Project is that you have people passionate about science or having PhDs or so. And what I find interesting is that this problem or issue of preaching to those who are already convinced is a much more general issue in science communication and in all sorts of public participation in science, and we see this as a very general thing. And I think people in science communication and scholars in science communication have been thinking about these issues and may have come up with solutions to that. So we might look at these literature to come up with some ideas of how to tackle this with regard to this new trend of citizen science as well. So I'm very pleased with everybody participating in the chat. I think people, all participants, you really made the chat a very rich source, adding perspectives and links and projects and initiatives from all over the world. So this will be recorded, this is recorded, so this won't be lost. Please continue to add your projects and initiatives over the chat, or you can email us with any more questions and initiatives you might have. We are at the end of our time for this webinar, and I want to thank all the speakers and all of you who participated in the webinar for all your perspectives and questions and inputs. So I hope to see you at some point, conference, webinar, citizen science event in the near future. I thank everybody and close the audio discussion, but I think the chat function will stay open for a minute and people can continue to provide their input and add to this resource. Thanks, everybody, and bye.
Thank you, everybody.